Welcome back, everybody. We are now on video 4 for chapter 9 and on a major concept called the spending multiplier. The spending multiplier is very much a Keynesian concept. Keynes wanted to show us, or believed, and it is actually what we execute quite often today, that when the government wants to do something about the economy, it needs to understand that the amount of money that is injected in the economy in any area is going to multiply and grow. And if you think about it, when you spend money with a store, that store is going to spend money with their supplier, and then their supplier with their other supplier. It's the same amount of money gets spent and respent multiple times. And so I have these 4 jars for you because the idea is we have an injection of cash, and this injection of cash is going to multiply enough times to fill that jar. And this is how much the economy is growing by. Now, I'm going to give you both kinds of qualitative and quantitative examples in a minute, but let's first understand that the spending multiplier is a formula. It is this M with the, this little S here, and spending multiplier is 1 divided by 1 minus MPC, the marginal propensity to consume. In other words, 1 over the marginal propensity to save. Now, we end up finding out what percentage of additional income, as in disposable income, people consume, and that tells us what our MPC is. And if you remember from chapter 8, we had used an MPC of 75% to come up with a multiplier of 4. So I'm just kind of staying consistent with that concept. So we have here an MPC of 75%, 1 divided by 0.25, right? Because it's 1 minus 0.75 is 1 point, it's like saying how many quarters in a dollar, and it's 4. So when you divide 1 by 2.5, you get 4. That is applying the formula. It is as simple as that, as straightforward as that. The way it works in real life, let's take something, for instance, like the Big E. The Big E comes to Massachusetts and every fall, and it brings with it 1 million or 2 million visitors, something like that. These visitors are coming from out of state sometimes. So sometimes they're local, sometimes they're pretty far away. Some of them stay at a hotel, they spend money at the fair, they put gas in their cars, they spend money with gas stations, they might eat out, they might go to the Basketball Hall of Fame and spend money there, they might go to the Volleyball Hall of Fame in Holyoke and spend money there. They are bringing with them money, and they're spending it with boutiques, with restaurants, with the government. They park in public spaces, they pay for that, they might pay a toll, they might use a public parking lot. Well, kind of said that. The idea here is that they are spending money locally. That injection of cash, let's say they bring with them $5 million that they inject in the area over that almost 3-week period. That $5 million is not going to benefit the area just $5 million worth, because the hotels are going to be paying salaries, they're going to be replenishing their supplies, paying their utility bills, right? The boutiques are going to be buying new merchandise. They're also going to have a bunch of bills that have to do with running their operation. The government the same way. This money is going to be respent. If you're working with a multiplier of 4, it's going to be respent 4 times, and that's going to increase the local GDP by $20 million. You can think of this as any time you have spring break somewhere, a festival, any injection of cash, a new plant that comes to an area, and with it comes a bunch of subsidies anytime. So it's project-specific spending that ends up multiplying and translating into a bigger effect nationwide or region-wide. That is what your multiplier is. So for instance, okay, this looks pretty decent on the screen. Here's a quantitative example of how the multiplier works and what's going on with it. Quantitative means we're going to be using numbers. Now, the change in the real GDP requires 2 variables. It requires autonomous spending, and it requires the spending multiplier. The spending multiplier is M. Autonomous spending is, remember, that spending that is independent of income or the real GDP, which is done by the business sector, the foreign sector, and the government sector. As expenditures, they become investment, government, and net exports. Any one of them is going to multiply X number of times, depending on the multiplier, and it's going to change the real GDP by that much. So here's a problem. What if we have autonomous spending of $200 billion? Let's say the government decides to stimulate the economy by buying up merchandise, the equivalent of $200 billion. And they're buying it from businesses. This is the whole point of a stimulus. And we have an MPC, a marginal propensity to consume, of 66.66%, right? 2/3 of the disposable income is getting consumed. What's happening to the change in the real GDP here? Well, if you have an MPC of 66.6% and you do 1 divided by the MPS, which is, remember the formula over here, is 1 divided by 1 minus the MPC, right? So if we go back here and we say 1 divided by 1 minus 0.6666, then we end up with 1 divided by 0.3333. That gives us a 3 for the multiplier. That means whatever this autonomous spending is, which is the $200 billion, it's going to grow 3 times, pushing the economy from a recessionary state back towards that natural state or the equilibrium GDP. So the $200 billion times 3 increases the real GDP by $600 billion. So what is the change? And we can make sure this is our real GDP here. What is the change? The change is $600 billion. So an economy, this would basically mean that at Y1 and Y3, the difference is $600 billion. In order to fill that gap and bring it forward to the natural, the government doesn't need to spend $600 billion. If it did, it would actually end up increasing the real GDP by 1.8 trillion. That's not what we want, because the amount of money that you want to increase it by is going to multiply according to the multiplier. So what's 1/3 of the 600 billion? Meaning I can ask it to you in reverse. I can say, we have a recessionary gap of 600 billion, and we have a multiplier of 3. What should the government do? Well, the government should cut its spending by 200 billion. If this were an inflationary gap, right? It would be coming this way. Or if I told you the government needs to increase it by 600 billion, what should they do? You don't say, oh, the government needs to pour 600 billion. You'd say, what's 1/3 of 600 billion? It's 200 billion. This is how you figure it out, basically. So in this case, we know the autonomous spending is 200 billion. We know the multiplier is 3. The effect of that is an increase of $600 billion that's added to the GDP to move us from a recessionary state all the way to the natural state where the aggregate supply curve. This here is a long-run aggregate supply curve that we will have to assume is overlapping. It's not visible, but we know that this is what that would mean in that case. Okay, now if we were to go here to kind of wrap up the multiplier, we're looking at a qualitative example in this case. The qualitative examples means you're not using numbers, you're kind of telling the story. So what's the change in the real GDP in this case due to the expenditure round? So I want to give you an example. So before we said 200 billion. Okay, let's use an example of ice cream. Imagine there's a study right here, or actually yogurt. I think I wanted to do it in yogurt now that I'm seeing it. I remember what I did. So let's say, for instance, there's a study, and this is true, by the way, that yogurt is very good for your microbiomes. The more you feed your microbiomes, that's the happy bacteria that lives in your intestines, right? The more you feed that, and you do not feed the bad bacteria that can make you sick or unwell, the more there's a communication between your gut and your brain, and you end up having this much better state of well-being. Your brain is happier, therefore you're less depressed, you're less anxious, you are more energized. This is actually a fact, which is why we say eat your probiotics. Well, let's say there's $5 million invested in yogurt because we're learning that yogurt is so much better for our gut health and our overall health. So what does that mean? That means that there's going to be more milk that's getting bought, more culture, more packaging. If there's going to be more yogurt, you're not going to say to people, open up your hands, here's your scoop, right? Everything that goes into putting that yogurt in their hands, but not literally, kind of literally, is going to increase in demand. So not only do we have more yogurt production, but all the inputs that made the yogurt in the first place, that's your first expenditure round. Then you also have more labor, more cows, more plastic, more ink, meaning the people who, if you want milk, you need more cows, right? So first, to make yogurt, you need more milk, but to also get more milk, you need more cows. You also need more cups. Well, you also need more plastic. You need more ink. You also need more research and development to figure out how to make more volume of milk from each cow and how to maybe make each cow healthier and maybe live longer, right? That requires research and development. And maybe also we need more shipping. If we have more yogurt, we might need more trucks. We might need more shelves to put our product on. Do you see how there is multiple expenditure rounds? But if you also need more shipping, you need more trucks, you need more plants, you need more equipment, you need more training that we are providing the employees. In order to have more plastic or more ink, you need things like benzene, or you need propylene, right? That's to make more ink. You need more cellulose or coal or natural gas or crude oil to make more plastic. It's all going back to its raw form. So in other words, it started with the $5 million in yogurt, and by the time it goes back from supplier to supplier to supplier, it's multiplying multiple times. And this is how you increase the real GDP using the spending multiplier. Okay, I hope this helped you. This is our last video for this chapter. You guys have a great one. I will see you in chapter 10.